I wanted to see if it was possible to retire purely off the FTSE 100. So that's exactly what we're going to find out today. I'm not a qualified financial advisor, and if you actually need financial advice, please seek it from someone who is trained to provide that. Just in case you didn't know, the FTSE 100 consists of the largest 100 UK companies by market cap. And if we just go onto the London Stock Exchange website and have a look which companies are featured in the FTSE 100, we can see here, I'll just change this to the largest market cap companies first. We can see we've got AstraZeneca, we've got HSBC, Unilever, GSK, BP, British American Tobacco, Shell. You know, you've probably heard a lot of these companies. They are really, really big known companies. But stay tuned till the end of the video to find out why it may not be such a great idea to plant all of your retirement hopes purely on the FTSE 100. I suppose if we're trying to work out if we can retire based on the FTSE 100, then we really need to know what sort of retirement pot we're looking at. What do we need in our retirement pot in order to retire comfortably? And in order to do this, you need to sort of know how much you want to live on each year in retirement. For that reason, and knowing that everyone has a different way of living, a different lifestyle costs, we're going to look at this from 3 different positions. We're going to look at it from scenario 1, which assumes that someone needs £25,000 a year to live on comfortably. Situation scenario 2, which is going to be for £30,000 a year. And the last situation is going to be for £45,000 a year to live on in retirement. So we'll work through each one of them situations. And also there are a few different assumptions that we need to make in order to be able to calculate this. You've probably heard of this idea of withdrawing 4% a year in retirement. This comes down from the assumption that your investment pot will last you 30 years if you withdraw 4% a year. And of course, this assumption has its downfalls, but it's a good starting point. And following on from this, there is something called the 25 multiple rule. I don't know if that's its official name, but basically, this is the idea that if you take your annual salary that you need to live on in retirement and multiply it by 25, it will give you a pension pot amount. And it's this amount that you can then withdraw 4% a year comfortably for 30 years. And you may be thinking, hang on a minute. You haven't accounted for our good old friend, inflation. Well, don't you worry, we will be accounting for inflation in our calculations today. So now that we've figured out how much we need each year to live on in retirement, and we've decided that we're going to test for 3 different scenarios, and we know that we need to make some basic assumptions of multiplying our annual salary by 25 to get our pension pot, which will then allow us to withdraw 4% each year to live on, we really need to know what the average annual returns are for the FTSE 100. The FTSE 100 was founded or launched on the 3rd of January 1984. And since inception, I've read different sources that say that the estimated annual average return of the FTSE 100 since inception sits at around 7.5%. But what I will say is this really depends on which time period you look at it from. If you're going to take a time period that includes the 90s, then you're going to see that during that time period, there was a massive return. The market boomed. But then if you take another time period and you maybe look at 2010 to 2019, the annual return was probably a lot less because not that much really happened during that time period. So it really depends. And of course, past performance does not indicate future performance. But for the sake of this video, we need to make some assumptions. So we're going to assume that the average annual return of the FTSE 100 sits at 7.5%. And like I said, we will take into account inflation. According to Trade and Economics, the inflation rate for the UK is on average 2.5% each year. So this is the figure that we're going to use. Let's now jump into an online calculator and see if we can retire from the FTSE 100. Like I said earlier on in the video, we are going to look at 3 different scenarios, and we will also play around with some different variables as well, because not everyone is going to be in the same financial situation, and even so, the one individual may not be in the same financial situation today as they are in 10 years, 15 years, or even 30 years. Okay, so let's say that you can afford to put £500 as a one-off lump sum investment into the FTSE 100. And like I said, we're going to assume that the interest rate on the FTSE 100 is on average 7.5% a year, and we're going to leave this for 30 years to grow. And each month we are going to put £100 into the FTSE 100, and we will increase deposits yearly with inflation at 2.5% as we discussed earlier. So if we press calculate, it will show us that if we do this, that the pension pot that we have in 30 years time will sit at £177,554.55. Now, if I take that figure here on my calculator and I divide that by 25, then this will give us the amount that pension pot will allow us to live on every single year in retirement. And that figure is not very great. That figure comes out at £7,102. You can probably agree that just over £7,000 per year to live on is no way to live. It's not a comfortable salary each year to live on. So we're going to have to mess around with this calculator a little bit. If we go back up and we change our initial balance, so that one-off lump sum investment at the start of our investing journey, to £1,000, and then we change our monthly contributions to 250, let's see what we get now. We get a pension pot of £441,551.26p. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take that figure and I'm going to divide it by 25, and that gives me £17,662. That's approaching that lower figure of £25,000 a year that we said we would want to be comfortable and live on in retirement. But it's not quite there yet. Now, I won't make you sit and watch me mess around and do trial and error with this calculator, and instead I'll just fast forward and show you what I found out. In order to have £25,000 a year for 30 years in retirement, you would need to put an initial investment amount down of £1,000. On top of that, you would have to then find yourself £357 a month, every single month for 30 years, to invest into the FTSE 100. This would then give you a pension pot of £626,490.06, which then, if you divide by 25, that would give you just over £25,000 a year. So this is exactly how much you would need to invest each month for 30 years in order to have that £25,000 a year in retirement. So what would you need to invest in order to jump from £25,000 to £30,000 a year in retirement? If you invest again a lump sum of £1,000 at the beginning, you would then have to find £430 a month to invest to get £30,106 a year during retirement. For £45,000 a year, you would need a pot of around £1,132,922, so just over 1.1 million, which means putting £1,000 up front, like the examples before, but you would also need to find £650 each and every month for 30 years in order to be able to live off £45,000 a year. And of course, £45,000 a year may be what some of you define as an extremely comfortable life, and others may think that that's not really the sort of lifestyle you want in retirement, but it gives you an idea. Now, I do think for the average person, investing £650 every single month is quite a big ask, and it's quite unreasonable really. Even investing £430 a month or £357 a month, as we saw in these examples, is quite difficult for most people. However, if you are in your 20s currently and you can afford to invest £430 every single month for 30 years into the FTSE 100, and you let compound interest do its thing and you get all of your dividends reinvested, then in 30 years time, so perhaps when you're 50, 52, 55, you can then retire, withdraw 4% from your portfolio within your FTSE 100 every single year and live off £30,000 or just over £30,000 each year during retirement. I think this shows us some basic principles of investing. I think it shows us that the more consistent you are with investing, so putting money into your investments each and every month or as regularly as you can afford to do so, starting early, and of course, again, some people don't start investing until they're 30, 40, 50, and that's still great. And also how much money you have to invest can really determine how quickly and how easily it will be for you to be able to reach your portfolio that you will need to retire. And also remember that the returns on the market really depend on the market, and it depends on the time period that we're going through and the macroeconomic situation of the world when you're investing and when you're looking to retire. And we can't predict these things as much as some people like to try. Someone that started investing during the 2008 financial crash, the financial crisis, was probably able to retire and have a really nice juicy portfolio pot a lot sooner than someone that started investing, let's say, 5 years before that crash. But I think what we should talk about now is whether or not it's a good idea to put all of your hopes and dreams and just invest into the FTSE 100. What I will say is the FTSE 100 does consist of some fantastic companies, and by no means are these just UK-based companies. These are companies that operate on the global level. But what I also will say is that diversification can be really important to lower your risk. So if you do want a truly diversified portfolio, you probably wouldn't look just to have the FTSE 100. Maybe you'd look to have a global index tracker, or maybe the FTSE 100 with another tracker like the S&P 500, for example. What I think the FTSE 100 lacks is these big technology companies. So in the S&P 500, we see the likes of Microsoft, we see the likes of Apple, we see other companies that are really changing the way that their industry is being run, the likes of Tesla, these massive, massive companies that are really at the forefront of our generation, to be honest. Whereas if you look at the FTSE 100, you see very stable companies. You see companies that have been operating for a long, long time. And obviously this is great, but it doesn't always lend itself to really, really big annual returns. In the FTSE 100, we tend to see the industries that are a little bit more stable and are not so much geared towards high growth. So we see consumer staples, we see a lot of pharmaceutical companies, we see oil and gas companies, and we see the big banks. We don't really have anything that would compete against Apple or, be anything like Apple. We don't have anything to compete or be like Tesla. We don't have these new chip companies that are completely changing the way that the world is run. We don't really have that in the UK. We're very much more, we have these stable companies that investors can rely on to produce good returns and stable returns, but you're probably not going to see anything crazy. Having said that, the FTSE 100 right now is doing very well compared to the S&P 500. But what I will also say is that the S&P 500 is obviously the 500 largest companies in the US. And even just one of those companies, so Apple, for example, has a market cap bigger than the whole FTSE 100, which is pretty insane. But I suppose that just shows us how big the US market is compared to perhaps the UK market. If you want me to do this video and instead do it for the S&P 500 or any other funds out there, do let me know. I'd love to do that. It's very interesting to see what you would need in order to be able to retire off just one investment. I could even do it for a single company if you wanted me to, but let me know. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.